Coming to you from our studios in Atlanta, I'm Julianne Thompson, and this is America Rising. We're so glad you're joining us today for the first show of America Rising on Conservative Network Television. We want to be your online media source for the Tea Party movement in America. In future broadcasts, we will be featuring on-the-ground reporting and events from real Tea Party activists around Georgia and the nation. So if you're interested in becoming an activist reporter, email us at georgiateapartypatriots@gmail.com. What began in 2009 as a protest against bailouts, overspending, and a government spiraling out of control is now a full-fledged political movement, making a huge difference in this year's election. The Tea Party movement is over 15 million members strong across the nation and growing. Tea Party candidates are running in at least 33 races on the November ballot and are projected to win at least 8 of those targeted seats. So, what does that mean for the Tea Party movement in Washington, D.C.? And how will those newly elected legislators fare in our nation's capital? Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann has formed the Tea Party Caucus. She stated that the caucus will not try to speak for the Tea Party movement, but rather be a direct ear to listen to the American citizens. The 29-member caucus includes Georgia's own Congressman Tom Price, Phil Gingrey, and Paul Brown. We hope that number will be growing significantly after November 2nd. Well, the Tea Party movement began in America, but the populist movement is sweeping the world as patriots are rising up around the globe. Just as Americans responded to our economic crisis by demanding a return to fiscal responsibility, spending cuts, limited government, and free markets, so has the rest of the world. Europe in particular has the largest coalition of Tea Parties outside the U.S. They were spurred in response to the Greek economic collapse and their displeasure of massive government spending in European countries. Tea Parties have been established in Great Britain, Italy, Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, the Czech Republic, and other countries, including our friends down under. Yes, the Tea Party movement has also arrived in Australia. Well, the Tea Party movement may be sweeping the world, but Georgia has been at the forefront of this grassroots movement from the very beginning. Joining us today is Atlanta-based political strategist David Johnson. David, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
David, you're familiar with the Tea Party platform here in Georgia, and I want to get your opinion about the fact that it is ethics-based. How do you think current legislators are going to feel about that?
Well, I think a lot of legislators might decide it's time to run for the hills, and others will feel that it's long overdue. But I think the average voter feels that it's great, and that's one of the reasons why the Tea Party movement is resonating with so many average Americans across the country. And it's particularly here in Georgia, there's a feeling that these politicians will say anything to get elected. They run on one platform, promising a responsible government, ethics-based government, but when then they get elected, they do something entirely different. So that's why I feel that this particular aspect of the platform is resonating so deeply.
Now, another very important part of the platform, because the 3 core values of the Tea Party movement are fiscal responsibility, constitutionally limited government, and free markets, one of the very important parts of the platform is the fact that we want to overturn Governor Perdue's veto of the Sunset Bill and zero-based budgeting. How do you think that's going to go over?
I think that's really going to go over well with a lot of voters, with the legislators. Some will be for it, others will not be for it. I think ultimately, though, they're going to read the tea leaves that we're seeing in November. They're going to see the election results. They're going to know that if they don't overturn these vetoes, then they're the next ones whose heads will be on the chopping block. That's why I think ultimately it will be overridden.
Well, that surely applies to the concept of fiscal responsibility. How do you feel about the constitutional amendment that we're hoping to get passed that's going to be based on inflation and population, very similar to the Tabor Act, which is the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights? It states that taxpayers' funds will have a percentage go to a rainy day fund, a percentage to pay off the debt, and a percentage go back to the taxpayers based on a sliding rate. How do you think that's going to go over?
I think with your voters, it's going to go over very well because it's common sense. Look, it's what most people are doing in their everyday life as far as balancing a checkbook, making sure that they do reward themselves a little bit, but they have something saved for a rainy day fund. For a lot of the legislators, this is going to be a complete shock to their system because some of them have spent like drunken sailors. But I think they're also going to read, as I said, the results of November, They're going to see the mood of the country and the mood here in Georgia, where we're going, and they're going to realize that if they don't pass this, if they don't go along with it, come 2012, the Tea Party movement will run candidates again, and some of these legislators who aren't going along with what the voters want will find themselves out of a job.
Well, David, one of the key core values of the Tea Party movement is constitutionally limited government. We talk about it all the time, and we talk about the fact that if our children, and adults for that matter, were actually educated in the Constitution, we wouldn't be in our current problem that we have in America. So how do you feel about what we've proposed, where Georgia would be offered, or where Georgia would be required to offer an academic elective on the Constitution and our founding documents, and that state-funded colleges and universities would offer college-level credit for those courses? And of course, private colleges would be able to opt in as well to providing credit for that. How do you feel about that, and how do you think that's going to fare in the legislature?
I think it's an excellent idea. I don't think it should just be an elective. It should be actually a requirement, especially for a lot of these judges who don't seem to understand where the Constitution is coming from, and even some of our own legislators and elected office holders. I think it will be passed with a conservative legislature here in Georgia. I think it's something that the voters want, and I think it really is an idea whose time has come. I mean, we keep talking about the need to go back to the Constitution. We can't go back to the Constitution unless our future leaders, our future generations know exactly what the Constitution is. And sadly, most of them don't. Most of them can't even say who wrote the Constitution, what the first 10 amendments are, or anything. So before we can go back to a constitutional-based government, we need to have students who are aware of the Constitution and what it says. So I definitely think this is an idea whose time has come. I think it will be passed.
So David, we've talked about the Constitution, we've talked about constitutional education for our children. So let's talk about the 10th Amendment. That's something that is definitely part of the Tea Party platform. And we want to get back to basics, we want to get back to states' rights, and we want to stop a federal government spinning out of control. So how do you think that's going to go over with the legislature, and do you have any suggestions on that?
Well, yes, I think it'll go over very well. I mean, remember, we're talking the state legislature. They always like to get power back. So, of course, they're going to be all for it, except for a few of the extreme radical liberals in the legislature. But look, this is something that's been happening, really, if you look, for over the past 8 years. It's not just happened overnight. The federal government has expanded. We have a runaway federal government. And a lot of people who say they're conservative have forgotten. Conservative doesn't mean, government can solve the problems, just do it in a more efficient manner. Being a conservative, being a strict constitutionalist means less government. And that's where we've really gone astray. Here in Georgia, what we need to do is begin reining in. We need to begin challenging the federal government. And I'm not talking like the liberals try to make it out that we're talking about armed insurrection. What I'm talking about is we need to challenge them in federal court. We need to use the court system to regain our powers. And that's why elections are so important. We also need to ensure that we elect conservative office holders here in Georgia and throughout the country. Because one of the things that's overlooked in every presidential election, in every major election, are judges. That's what's so important. If we're going to return the power back to the states, we need judges who believe in the Constitution, who don't decide that they're going to make the law from the bench. And that's one of the first ways that we can start. And that's probably the hardest thing really here in Georgia that we'll need to do, is really educate voters on which judicial candidates really have a strict interpretation of the Constitution. Because before we can get judges interpreting the Constitution, we need to elect judges, we need to elect legislators who will confirm, and state executives who will appoint conservative jurists to the bench. And that's the only way we're going to begin regaining the power to the states, through conservative judges.
And we certainly do have a lot of important issues coming up this legislative season. We need to be talking about water. We need to be talking about repealing Obamacare. So these are definitely things that are important. David Johnson, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, that's our report for today. I'm Julianne Thompson. Thank you for joining us. And remember, you are the heart and soul of the Tea Party movement.